Hey guys, tonight we are diving into a survival scenario that's less about dramatic rescues and more about the quiet, grinding persistence required to simply not freeze or starve to death alone in the vast, unforgiving wilderness. Picture this. It's the late 19th century, deep winter in rural Russia, and you are a lone fire watcher assigned to a remote outpost. Your job is usually pretty uneventful, mostly just scanning the horizon for smoke signals from other outposts or signs of forest fires, which in this kind of weather is about as likely as finding a functional espresso machine in a yurt. But today is different. A storm was forecast, sure, but not this kind of storm. You arrived at the tower just as the first serious gusts hit, naive enough to think you could quickly check in, maybe stash a few supplies, and head back before things got truly nasty. Turns out Mother Nature had other, far less convenient plans for you. You probably won't survive this, by the way, not comfortably at least. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is. Always cool to see how far these boring adventures travel. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The wind hits you like a physical blow as you wrestle the heavy wooden door shut behind you. It groans on its hinges, a sound already muffled by the rising howl outside, but loud enough in the sudden relative quiet of the tower's ground floor to make you jump. Dust motes dance in the single shaft of weak gray light filtering through a high, grimy window pane. The air inside is stagnant, cold, and smells faintly of damp wood, old soot, and something else. Maybe mouse? Yeah, probably mouse. You shrug off your heavy, damp coat, the thick wool already stiffening with ice around the edges. That short walk from where you tied up the sled, assuming the wind hasn't already completely buried it, felt like navigating a sensory deprivation tank made of ice shards and angry noise. Visibility dropped from about 50 feet to practically zero in the last 10 minutes. It's official. You are gloriously, spectacularly, and utterly trapped. You stamp your feet, trying to get some feeling back into your toes. The rough-hewn floorboards feel like solid ice under your worn leather boots. You knew this tower was old, of course. The Tsar's government wasn't exactly known for splashing out on modern amenities in remote fire-watching posts. This structure has probably been standing here, exposed on this small rise, for maybe a century or more, a lonely sentinel against the vast, indifferent taiga. Historians still argue whether these specific watchtowers were primarily for forest fire detection or also served a secondary, perhaps unacknowledged purpose like tracking nomadic movements or even guarding against potential border incursions, depending on the region. This one feels like it hasn't seen much action of any kind lately, aside from weathering the elements. The storm is escalating with terrifying speed. You can hear it now, a deep, resonant roar that seems to vibrate through the very stone and timber of the tower. It's not just wind, it's a complex symphony of sound. The high-pitched shriek of wind tearing around corners, the lower rumble of distant thunder, or is that just the wind? The constant tap, tap, tap of ice pellets hitting the glass, and occasionally a whirring thump against the walls, as if the blizzard itself is trying to break down the door and have a word with you. You look towards the small, high window again. What little light was coming in is now rapidly dimming, not just because of the time of day, but because the snow is building up outside, clinging to the glass, blurring the world into a swirling, opaque white. It's like someone pulled a thick, frozen curtain over reality. A quick check of the weather forecast? Oh, if only you had a phone signal out here or even a working telegraph line. Survival guides from this era were more likely to recommend checking which way the smoke from your chimney blew or observing animal behavior than consulting a complex meteorological model. Fun fact, one of the earliest documented uses of weather forecasting for public good dates back to the 16th century in Europe, but it was more about predicting general trends based on almanacs and folklore than the precise hour-by-hour updates we expect today. Your prediction method was much simpler. Look at the sky. And right now, the sky is screaming, bad idea. You feel a distinct chill radiating from the base of the door. That's not great. The wind is definitely finding its way through the cracks. Securing this place is going to be a priority. You glance around the small, single room on the ground floor. It's mostly empty, just a few tools leaning against the wall, a small, rusty stove, and a pile of chopped wood that looks insufficient. This wasn't supposed to be a long stay. Just drop off some fresh supplies, check the roof, make sure the ladder to the upper levels is sound, and head back. The universe has a wicked sense of humor. Remember that time you optimistically packed only light snacks for a short hike that turned into an accidental overnight adventure? This feels like that, but with significantly higher stakes and significantly less chance of being rescued by a friendly park ranger. Or a friendly babushka with a thermos of hot borscht, which would be preferable in this situation. You walk over to the base of the ladder leading up. It's a sturdy, vertical wooden ladder disappearing into a dark square opening in the ceiling above. There are undoubtedly upper levels, likely culminating in the actual observation platform at the very top. That's where you'll eventually need to get to see if there's any hope of signaling or if the storm is truly as absolute as it seems from down here. But for now, the ground floor provides a bit of initial shelter. You should probably take stock of what you do have. Every survival story starts with an inventory, right? It's like the boring prequel nobody wants to read, but it's absolutely essential. You pat down your pockets. Knife, check. Flint and steel, check. Small compass, check, though pretty useless in a featureless whiteout. A half-eaten piece of hardtack, check. Not exactly a gourmet spread. The roar outside intensifies again, shaking the tower faintly. A fresh blast of icy air curls around your ankles from under the door. Okay, inventory can wait a minute. That draft is a problem that needs addressing immediately. You look around for anything you can use to block it. There's some sacking in a corner, maybe some old rags. Nothing luxurious, obviously. This place isn't the Winter Palace. A weird historical tidbit. During particularly harsh Russian winters in the past, peasants would sometimes literally build snow tunnels between their houses and livestock sheds just to survive the trip back and forth. Your situation isn't quite that bad yet, but the idea of being so utterly cut off by snow resonates. You push the sack towards the gap under the door with your foot. It helps a little, but the wind is relentless, pushing against the wood, seeking any weakness. This is going to be a long night. The sack you shoved under the door isn't really doing much. The wind is like a persistent, icy liquid, finding every tiny gap, pooling cold air around your feet. It's the kind of draft that makes you question the structural integrity of the entire building, not just the door seal. You sigh, a puff of condensation visible in the frigid air. Okay, priority one is warmth, or at least less cold. That means the stove. You walk towards the small cast iron structure squatting in the corner. It looks ancient, its surface mottled with rust, the small door to the firebox hanging slightly ajar. This is your lifeline right now. You open the firebox wider and peer inside. There's a small amount of ash, but it looks relatively clean, like it was used recently but not heavily. Good sign maybe? Or maybe it just hasn't been cleaned ever. You poke around with a stick you find nearby. No obvious blockages in the flue pipe that disappears into the ceiling, which is a relief. A blocked chimney in a blizzard? That's a shortcut to a very bad day, involving either smoke inhalation or freezing, neither of which are on your ideal itinerary. Beside the stove is the pile of wood you saw earlier. You eye it critically. It's a mix of logs and smaller branches, mostly pine or birch, looks reasonably dry. But the quantity, yeah, definitely insufficient for anything more than a day or two of intermittent heating. If you're incredibly conservative, you kick a log with your boot. It feels heavy and solid. At least it's proper firewood, not just damp twigs. You'll need to ration this like gold. Speaking of gold, if you had any right now, you'd trade it all for a lifetime supply of seasoned oak in a modern, airtight wood stove. Now, what about actual supplies? You scan the room again. There's a small built-in cupboard near the wall, above what might have once been a simple bench. You open its creaky wooden door. Inside, well, it's not exactly a cornucopia. There's a small tin of what looks like tea leaves, a few hard biscuits that might predate the last czar, a lump of something gray and unidentifiable that you really hope isn't some kind of petrified cheese, and a half-empty burlap sack containing potatoes, a few sad-looking, slightly sprouted potatoes. This pantry inventory feels less like survival prep and more like the contents of a very forgetful squirrel's emergency stash from 3 winters ago. Your sophisticated meal plan of hardtack followed by more hardtack is suddenly looking wildly optimistic. You also spot a small dented kerosene lamp and a nearly empty can of fuel. That's something. Light is essential, especially as the storm outside seems to be swallowing the day whole. You check the wick on the lamp. It's okay, maybe a bit short. Kerosene provides light, yes, but also a tiny bit of heat, and more importantly, it wards off the absolute psychological blackness of total darkness. The thought of being alone in this creaking tower in pitch black, with the storm roaring outside, is not great. As you examine the walls more closely, you run your hand along the rough-cut logs that form the main structure. They're solid, clearly old and weathered, but stable. You can feel tiny drafts whistling through cracks where the chinking has deteriorated or fallen out. This tower is definitely not insulated to modern standards, or probably even 19th century trying not to die standards. It feels more like a sieve designed by someone who fundamentally misunderstood the concept of keeping warm. There's a particularly bad spot near the high window where the frame meets the log wall. Cold radiates off the glass like a miniature glacier. You make a mental note to try and block that up somehow. You move methodically around the perimeter of the room, feeling the floor, the walls, the baseboards. There are definite cold spots, areas where the wind is clearly penetrating. Near the door is the worst, of course. The corner opposite the stove also feels unnervingly cold, perhaps indicating a gap or weakness higher up that's letting cold air funnel down. This building has character, you tell yourself sarcastically. Mostly characters that involve drafts, rust, and questionable food items. Assessing the tower's overall structural integrity from the ground floor is tricky. You can see the massive corner posts and the heavy crossbeams supporting the floor above. Everything looks solid, despite the age. Old Russian log construction, done properly, can last for centuries, designed to withstand harsh winters and heavy snow loads. Mainstream historical fact: traditional Russian izbas, peasant houses, were often built from heavy logs, and their design with low ceilings and massive stoves, pechka, was specifically evolved to maximize heat retention in incredibly cold climates. This tower, while different in purpose, likely shares some of that underlying construction philosophy. Built tough, if not necessarily built warm by today's standards. You tap the wall near the ladder. It feels sturdy. The ladder itself looks solid, though the rungs are worn smooth in places. You can see the opening in the ceiling above, leading to the next level. It's just a dark void for now. The storm's roar is still intense, but slightly less deafening inside the tower, giving you a small sense of being protected, however flimsy that protection might feel. There's a quirky tidbit about these remote outposts. Some historical accounts mention the fire watchmen developing incredibly intricate methods for predicting weather changes, using everything from animal behavior to the specific sounds the wind made around the tower. Almost like a personal, hyper-local weather station based on folklore and acute observation. You wish you had one of those guys' knowledge right now. Your current method, yup, still blowing, is proving less than useful. You look back at your meager pile of supplies: potatoes, old biscuits, tea leaves, a bit of kerosene, some firewood, your own small pack with a knife, flint, compass, and that sad bit of hardtack. It's not much. It feels like you're participating in a particularly bleak version of a reality show where the contestants are given almost nothing and the host just laughs maniacally from off camera. For your next challenge, you can almost hear them say, survive the next 3 days on these provisions. Oh, and we've added a 40 degrees wind chill. Good luck. This assessment is complete. You have a basic understanding of your immediate environment: cold, drafty, built like a tank but insulated like a sieve, and stocked by someone who clearly expected you to either bring your own picnic or freeze quickly. Historians still argue whether the isolation of these posts led to significant psychological strain on the watchman, or if the solitude was sometimes preferred over village life, especially during harsh winters. For you right now, it's just a cold reality. The ground floor offers shelter from the direct onslaught of the storm, but it's not a long-term solution for staying warm. You'll need to explore upwards soon. Okay, time to go up. Staying on the ground floor, even with that sorry attempt at draft-proofing, is just prolonging the inevitable cold. The ladder stands against the wall, looking less like a sturdy staircase to safety and more like something salvaged from a very old barn that lost a fight with gravity. You walk towards it, your boots crunching slightly on the gritty floor. It's a simple, fixed wooden structure, built right into the tower. The wood is dark with age and wear, smooth where countless hands and boots have gripped and stepped on over the years. It feels solid enough when you test it, but you definitely wouldn't want to be sprinting up this thing. It's more of a careful, considered ascent situation. You grab the rough uprights, feeling the grain of the ancient wood beneath your gloves. Cold, obviously. Everything is cold. Taking a deep breath, another little cloud blooming in the air, you place your first boot on the lowest rung. It holds. Good start. You push off the floor and begin to climb. It's not a steep ladder, thankfully, but it's vertical enough to require your full attention. Each rung is thick, worn concave in the middle where boots have landed over decades, maybe centuries. You test each one with your weight before committing. Creak, another creak. It's not the sound of imminent collapse, more like the tower sighing under your presence, reminding you of its age. The wood feels dry, brittle perhaps, but surprisingly unyielding. Your muscles, stiff from the cold and the initial shock of arrival, protest slightly. This isn't exactly rock climbing, but it's not a leisurely stroll either. Think of it like navigating a very old, slightly grumpy tree trunk indoors. As you ascend, the view of the ground floor changes. The small, sad collection of supplies shrinks below you. The dark square of the door and your pathetic draft-excluding sack look even more inadequate from this perspective. The sound of the storm seems to shift too. It feels closer, more intense, or maybe it's just that the tower structure is different up here, transmitting the wind's roar in a new way. You can hear the higher-pitched whistles of air finding tiny breaches in the walls more clearly now. You reach the opening in the ceiling. It's just a raw-cut square in the heavy timbers that form the floor of the level above. No trapdoor, just a hole. You pull yourself up, one hand finding purchase on the rough edge of the floorboards, then the other. It's an awkward maneuver, hauling yourself through the opening. You swing a leg up, then the other, scrambling onto the floorboards of the second level. You're standing now on the second floor, hunched over slightly to get your bearings. The air here feels colder than the ground floor, which is saying something. There's less protection overhead, and perhaps this level is less enclosed or more exposed to the wind whipping around the tower's exterior. The light is dimmer too, filtered through high, narrow windows set into the walls. These windows are just slits, really, designed for observation, not illumination or warmth. One of them seems to have a crack running through a pane, and near it you can see a fine dusting of snow that's managed to penetrate the glass or the frame. Yeah, definitely colder up here. This level feels less like a living space and more like what it probably was, a working platform. The layout is simpler. It's just a circular room, mirroring the tower's footprint. The walls are the same rough logs, but maybe not quite as thick as on the ground floor. There's another ladder disappearing upwards through another hole in the ceiling, presumably to the observation deck at the very top. That climb is for later. For now, you focus on this level. There isn't much furniture. Maybe a simple, rough-hewn table anchored to the wall, coated in a layer of dust and that fine snow. Beside it, a stool. This is where the watchman would sit or stand, keeping vigil. On the table, you find a few more items: a stub of a candle, a battered tin mug, and what looks like a very old, very stiff, leather-bound logbook. You pick it up carefully. The pages are brittle, filled with faded ink. It's mostly just dates and simple observations. Clear, snowing, windy, no smoke. Someone sat here day after day, year after year, watching the vast empty landscape. Checking the rest of the level, you find more evidence of neglect. There are gaps in the chinking here that you could stick your finger through. The drafts are constant, insidious. It feels like being inside a wind chime, but instead of pleasant tones, you get icy blasts. This level is clearly less insulated than the ground floor, likely because its primary purpose was visibility, not comfort. It was a lookout post, a functional space, not a cozy cabin. You run your hand along the wall near the cracked window pane. The wood is covered in a thin film of ice in places. Lovely. This is definitely not the place to try and sleep tonight, unless you want to experience what it might feel like to be a forgotten ice sculpture. This level also highlights the sheer isolation of the watchmen. They weren't just looking for fires. They were also reporting on troop movements, tracking travelers, and generally acting as remote eyes for the authorities. Mainstream historical fact. These kinds of fire-watching towers, known as pozornaya kalancha, in Russian cities or simpler versions like this in rural areas, were crucial for early warning, especially in vast, forested regions where wildfires could spread rapidly and undetected. They were a vital part of infrastructure before modern communication. You find another small, built-in shelf. What treasures await? Ah, disappointment. A few more petrified biscuits, looking even less appealing than the ones downstairs. And something wrapped in cloth that you initially hope is food, but turns out to be just a bundle of tinder dry moss and twigs. Useful for starting a fire, sure, but not exactly a morale booster on the menu front. This tower feels like it's been picked clean by time, weather, and perhaps very hungry mice. A quirky tidbit related to the watchman's life. Some sources suggest these isolated posts were sometimes manned by soldiers or retired veterans, who might have been assigned these quiet duties as a form of semi-retirement or even light punishment, leading to a unique subculture of solitary or paired watchmen living by very specific routines and superstitions to cope with the loneliness. Standing here, feeling the wind bite through the gaps, you can appreciate the dedication required for this job. Day in, day out, watching. Especially during a blizzard like this, where visibility must have been zero, the job would shift from fire spotting to simply enduring. This level was their workspace, their sentry post. It's functional but harsh. Historians still argue whether the primary purpose of these remote rural towers was strictly fire detection, or if they also served a more covert role in surveillance and controlling movement through sensitive areas, especially near borders or major routes. Looking around, you don't see any obvious surveillance equipment beyond the windows themselves, but the isolation certainly lends itself to quiet observation. The assessment of the second level is clear. It's higher, colder, draftier, and offers even fewer creature comforts than the ground floor. It was a place of work, not rest. The storm's presence is more keenly felt here. The wind a constant, probing presence. This level isn't suitable for hunkering down long term. You need to keep moving, keep exploring upwards. Okay, onwards and upwards. Literally, having surveyed the slightly less dreadful ground floor and the distinctly more dreadful second floor, there's only one place left to go within the tower itself, the very top. The ladder leading from the second level disappears through another opening in the ceiling above, just like the one you used to get here. It looks the same, old, wooden, fixed in place, probably just as grumpy about being climbed as the last one. You walk towards it, the boards creaking under your weight. The air up here is thin and sharp. It feels like you're breathing ice shards. You can already hear the wind whistling even louder, a higher-pitched shriek than the one on the ground floor. It seems the higher you get, the more the tower acts like a giant, drafty flute for the blizzard. Fun times. Gripping the uprights, you start to ascend. This ladder feels slightly different, maybe a little less worn, or perhaps it's just your imagination playing tricks. Each rung still needs testing. Creak, squeak, the sounds are amplified up here, bouncing off the rough walls. You can feel the tower subtly swaying in the wind, a very slight, almost imperceptible movement that is deeply unsettling. It's like being inside a tall, skinny tree, that's being shaken by a giant. Just another layer of comforting, sleep-inducing sensation, right? As you climb, the opening to the second floor shrinks below you. The dim light from the slit windows fades. You're climbing into a space that feels even more exposed. The wind's roar becomes dominant, a constant, deafening presence outside the thick walls. You can hear snow or ice crystals being hurled against the timbers with surprising force. It sounds like handfuls of gravel being thrown at the tower walls. Reaching the top opening is similar to the one below, another raw-cut hole. You pull yourself up, the cold wood biting into your hands even through your gloves. Swinging your legs through, you stand up onto the floorboards of the observation deck. And wow, just wow, this is different. There's no roof here, or at least not a solid one, protecting you from the elements. You're standing on a circular platform that seems to be partially covered by a sort of open-sided structure. Maybe just a few timbers providing partial overhead shelter from straight-down snow, but certainly no protection from the wind that is absolutely howling around you. The air is viciously cold, perhaps colder than anywhere else, and it whips around the platform relentlessly. Your breath is instantly snatched away, turning into a visible cloud that disappears faster than a free donut at a police station. The observation deck is essentially the top of the tower, designed for maximum visibility in fair weather. It's a relatively small circular area, maybe 10 feet in diameter. A low wooden railing runs around the perimeter, presumably to stop watchmen from taking an unscheduled, rapid trip to the ground. The floor is just rough planks, probably layered with snow and ice even when the weather is clear. Right now, it's covered in a thick, wind-scoured layer of snowdrifts and slick patches of ice. Navigating this level is a treacherous shuffle. You move cautiously towards the railing, trying to see outside. It's pointless. The blizzard is a complete whiteout. There is absolutely nothing to see but swirling snow, thick and opaque. It's like looking into a giant, angry cotton ball that's trying to actively blind you. You can feel the incredible force of the wind pushing against the tower, vibrating through the structure beneath your feet. It feels like the world outside has ceased to exist, replaced by this churning, freezing chaos. There are a few items on the deck. Fastened to the center post, which might be the main support for the upper structure, or perhaps just held a flagpole, is what looks like a very old brass telescope. It's covered in a thick layer of frost and snow, probably useless in this weather. There's also a large, heavy iron bell mounted on a wooden frame near the railing, presumably for sounding an alarm if a fire was spotted. You reach out to touch it. It's colder than anything you've ever felt, probably enough to freeze your skin to it instantly if you weren't careful. This is where they watched, where they waited. Mainstream historical fact. Watchtowers like this, especially in flat or heavily forested areas, were strategically placed to provide overlapping fields of vision, forming a network that could spot fires or other significant events over vast distances. They were crucial nodes in early warning systems long before telegraphs or telephones were widespread in rural areas. This level is absolutely the worst place to be in the tower during a blizzard. There is no shelter from the wind, which is the real enemy right now. The cold is bone deep and immediate. The wind whips around you, finding every tiny gap in your clothing, seeming to steal the warmth right out of your body. It's a stark reminder of how quickly the elements can turn deadly. You wouldn't last long up here without constant movement, maybe an hour, 2 at most before serious hypothermia set in. Sleeping is completely out of the question. You'd become a very frozen historical artifact. You look down through the opening you just came through. The second level looks marginally better from up here, which tells you everything you need to know about this level. It's completely exposed to the full fury of the storm. It feels precarious, isolated, and incredibly hostile. A quirky tidbit about the watchman's routine. In fair weather, the top level would have been their primary post during daylight hours. They'd climb up here, sometimes spending their entire shift scanning the horizon, descending only for meals or breaks. Imagine doing that for hours on end, every single day, often alone. Puts a modern office job in perspective, doesn't it? Oh, the Wi-Fi is slow? Try a raven just landed on the railing and stared into my soul for an hour. Standing here, feeling the tower vibrate and groan under the onslaught of the wind, you get a real sense of its age and resilience. It's stood against storms like this before, maybe for 100 years or more, but you're not the tower, you're just a person rapidly losing body heat. This level's a place of function, a place of vigilance, but definitely not a place of survival in these conditions. Historians still argue whether the design of these remote towers prioritize height for visibility or structural integrity against high winds, given their exposed locations. Looking at how this one sways, it seems like a risky balance. Okay, assessment complete. Top level, exposed, freezing, zero visibility, zero comfort, definitely not a place to try and survive the night. It confirms your initial instinct. You need to find the most sheltered spot possible, not the most exposed one. That means going back down. The climb up was one thing. The climb back down on icy, wind-battered rungs will require even more caution. But staying here is suicide. You need shelter, and it's certainly not up here. Right, decision made. The top is a death trap. There's no two ways about it. You'd be a human icicle faster than you can say hypothermia. So it's time to execute the sensible, if slightly terrifying, maneuver of going back down. The ladder opening looks even less inviting now, a dark hole leading back into the relative gloom of the second level. Getting onto the ladder is tricky. The observation deck floor is slippery with ice and wind-blown snow. You have to carefully position yourself near the opening, gripping the edge of the timber surround, before finding the first rung with your foot. It's coated in ice. Great. This descent is going to be slow, careful, and probably involve a few involuntary yelps of surprise as your hand or foot slips a fraction of an inch. It's like climbing down a frozen waterfall made of splinters. What fun! Might as well strap on some ice skates while you're at it. You start the descent, one careful step at a time. Your gloves offer some grip, but the cold seeps through, making your fingers ache. The rungs feel even colder now, transmitting the bone-chilling temperature of the wind-whipped wood directly into your hands and feet. You can feel the tower sway a little more noticeably up here, the wind pushing and pulling at it with incredible force. Every creak and groan of the timber feels amplified, like the tower itself is complaining about your presence, or maybe just complaining about the weather, which is fair enough. The wind's roar begins to change pitch as you descend, dropping from that high-pitched shriek back towards the lower frequency moan you heard on the ground floor. It's still deafening, but different. You can see the opening below getting larger, and the faint, diffused light from the second floor windows becomes a little more apparent. It's not light, obviously, but compared to the pure white void of the blizzard outside and the dimness of the upper ladder shaft, it feels like a beacon of, well, slightly less terrible conditions. Stepping off the ladder onto the floorboards of the second level is a relief, albeit a minor one. You stand for a moment, catching your breath, which is still ragged and comes out in clouds of vapor. The air here is definitely colder than the ground floor, but the direct, biting force of the wind is absent. It's still drafty as heck, finding its way through every crack and gap in the walls and floor, but you're not directly exposed to the full fury. It's the difference between standing outside in a blizzard and standing inside a very leaky refrigerator during a windstorm. Still bad, but marginally better. You look around the second level again. The small space, the single slit windows, the rough walls. It still feels damp and cold. That rickety table is still there, looking just as uninviting. There's nothing here that offers any real comfort or shelter, just protection from the most immediate elements. No fireplace, no blankets, no forgotten stash of emergency rations. Sadly, no chocolate biscuits. It's just a bare, cold, drafty box. You can see the ladder going down to the ground floor near the trapdoor. Considering your options again, standing here on the second level. The top level? Out. The second level? Cold, drafty, elevated at bad in a fire, maybe less so in a blizzard, but still exposed to wind drafts coming up. The ground floor? Cold, damp, maybe slightly less exposed to wind overall, but potentially more prone to drifts blocking the door or ingress points closer to the ground. Each level has its distinct flavor of misery. It's like being offered a choice between three types of poison: fast acting, top; medium acting, second; or slow acting and damp ground. You decide to descend further, back to the ground floor. Maybe the familiarity of the lowest level will feel more grounded, less likely to blow over perhaps? The ladder down is the first one you climbed, the one that protested your weight so loudly. You grip the uprights, your hands still stinging from the cold of the upper ladders. The descent is slower now. Your muscles are starting to feel the chill, and the thought of falling even a short distance onto the ground floorboards is a strong motivator for caution. One wrong step could mean a sprained ankle, which in these conditions would quickly turn a bad situation into a fatal one. It's the kind of risk assessment that really sharpens your focus, like trying to walk across a sheet of ice while carrying a priceless Ming vase. Finally, your feet touch the ground floor. Ah, home sweet home. Or, home not quite as terrifying as the alternatives. You stand there brushing snow and ice crystals from your clothes. The air down here is still bitterly cold and carries that damp, earthy smell, but it lacks the vicious whip of the wind from the upper levels. The sound of the blizzard is a deep rumble now, a constant pressure against the sturdy base of the tower, rather than a high-pitched scream around exposed timbers. You can still hear the wind whistling through the doorway and window slits, but it feels less overwhelming. Re-evaluating the ground floor, it's dark, damp, and cold. The doorway gapes open slightly, letting in blasts of icy air and snow. The single small window slit provides almost no light. The only furniture is that unstable stool. The stone foundation feels like it's sucking the heat right out of the air, but it's sheltered from the direct wind above. The walls are thickest here. If the tower were to be damaged by the storm, this level might offer the most structural protection, however minimal. Mainstream historical fact, tower structures like this often incorporated thicker walls at the base, transitioning to thinner construction higher up to save on materials and weight, while the solid foundation provided stability against forces like wind. This structural principle has been used in architecture for centuries, from ancient fortresses to modern skyscrapers. It's basic physics, really. You want your base solid and heavy. Okay, comparing the three levels again. Top, absolutely not. Second, marginally better but still very exposed to drafts and elevated. Ground, damp and cold, but seems to offer the most structural shelter from the wind's direct force and potential tower movement. It feels the most rooted. It feels like this is the level where you might stand the slightest chance of surviving the night, purely because you aren't directly in the path of the worst wind or perched precariously high up. A quirky tidbit about the design. Some remote watchtowers were designed with a small, enclosed room on the ground floor, specifically for the watchman to shelter in during severe weather, equipped with a small stove or fireplace. Others, like this one appears to be, were purely functional observation posts with minimal consideration for the occupants' comfort in harsh conditions. Looks like you drew the short straw on the design lottery. This one is definitely minimal consideration. So the ground floor seems to be the least bad option. It's not good, not by a long shot, but it's better than freezing solid at the teat or enduring constant drafts on the second. It's a cold, damp, dark, slightly open space, but it's the best shelter this tower offers from this particular storm. Historians still argue whether the relative Spartan nature of some remote outposts, like this watchtower seems to be, was due to budgetary constraints, a deliberate toughening regimen for the watchmen, or simply the pragmatic view that they were temporary posts for hardy individuals. The thought of trying to sleep here is daunting. It's freezing, loud with the storm, and you're probably sitting on stone. But it's the only option that doesn't involve guaranteed rapid hypothermia. You need to make the most of this least terrible spot. Survival isn't about comfort, it's about finding the slightly less lethal option and clinging to it. And right now, that option is the cold, damp floorboards of the tower's base. Time to figure out how to make this even remotely survivable. So you're on the ground floor. This is it, your best worst option. The air is thick with a chilling dampness that feels like it's seeping directly into your bones. The temperature must be well below freezing, maybe hovering around that point where things just feel utterly hostile to life. You can still hear the storm raging outside. The wind, a constant low growl punctuated by higher-pitched shrieks as gusts claw at the structure. Snow is visible drifting in through the slight gap under the ill-fitting door, piling up in a small, mocking white crescent on the floorboards. Your breath plumes out in thick clouds, hanging in the still air before slowly dissipating. Everything you touch feels like ice. The wooden floorboards are numbingly cold under your feet, even through your boots. The stone foundation wall feels like touching a glacier. It's clear that whatever heat your body is generating is being sucked away relentlessly by the environment. You need to do something, anything, to try and slow this down. Survival isn't about being warm and comfortable. It's about not dying right now. You look at the pathetic collection of items available. The rickety stool, the empty sack, your own clothes. That's it. No axe for wood, not that there's any wood. No fire starter, no extra blankets, no food beyond whatever meager crumbs you might have in your pockets. Spoiler, there are none. This is a minimalist survival scenario if ever there was one. It makes those reality TV shows look like luxury cruises. Welcome to extreme hibernation, where your only challenge is not freezing to death. Your luxury item is an empty sack. First things first, try to mitigate the drafts. The worst offender is the door. It's heavy timber, but clearly warped or shrunk with age, leaving that gap at the bottom and around the edges where the wind whistles through like a malicious tune. You could try and block it. With what? The sack? You pick up the rough burlap sack. It's thin and provides zero insulation. Trying to stuff it into a gap is like trying to stop a flood with a tea towel. It's futile, but you try anyway, shoving part of the sack along the bottom gap of the door. The wind just laughs and finds new ways around it. Okay, maybe not as a draft stopper. What else can the sack be used for? As a blanket? Hilarious. It would provide about as much warmth as a spider web. A pillow? Maybe, but a very hard, lumpy one. Perhaps its best use is psychological. At least you have something, however useless. You set it down, a small, damp symbol of your inadequate resources. The stool. It's unstable, barely more than 3 legs and a wobbly seat. It's too small to lie on, too unstable to use as a platform. Could you sit on it to get off the floor? Yes, you could. The floor is radiating cold. Sitting on the stool might keep your core slightly elevated from the worst of the conductive heat loss to the floorboards and stone. It's not much, but it's a thought. You tentatively perch on the stool. It creaks ominously. Okay, maybe minimal movement is key while on the stool. It's slightly better than the floor, but you're still exposed to the ambient cold and drafts. It feels like sitting on a popsicle stick in a freezer. You scan the walls again, hoping against hope to find some hidden nook, some forgotten corner that isn't quite so exposed. There isn't one. The entire space is open to the drafts and the overwhelming cold. Maybe there's a spot where the drafts aren't quite as bad. You shuffle around, feeling the air currents with your face and hands. Near the base of the ladder seems slightly less turbulent, possibly because the thick uprights of the ladder frame offer a tiny bit of buffering. It's still freezing, but the wind isn't hitting you quite so directly here. This might be your chosen spot. Next to the ladder, using its bulk as a minimal windbreak, you decide to try and make this small area your camp. You can't build a fire. You can't seal the tower. All you can do is try to retain what little body heat you have. Your clothes are decent for walking in cold weather, but not for standing or sitting still for hours on end in sub-zero temperatures and drafts. Layers are key in cold climates, and while you have layers, they weren't intended for this level of extreme, static cold exposure. It's like bringing a light jacket to the Arctic. Mainstream historical fact. In rural Russia during the 19th century, surviving winter required meticulous preparation. Peasant homes were typically built low to the ground with thick log walls and small windows to conserve heat. Stoves, often large masonry units called pechka, were the central feature, providing heat for the home and often used for cooking and even sleeping on their warm surfaces. Surviving without a heat source in a structure like this tower would have been almost unthinkable. You wrap your arms around yourself, trying to conserve warmth. The cold is relentless. It sinks into your limbs, making your fingers and toes ache and feel clumsy. Your face feels stiff. You try stamping your feet quietly to keep circulation going, but the noise feels too loud in the otherwise constant roar of the storm. You sit back down on the stool, hunching over, trying to make yourself smaller, hoping that reducing your surface area helps. It feels pathetic, a small, shivering human trying to hide from an indifferent, monstrous storm. It's like playing hide and seek with a hurricane. Guess who wins? Perhaps there's some way to insulate yourself from the floor, even on the stool. The sack isn't big enough or thick enough to wrap around you effectively. Maybe putting it under you on the stool? You try this. It adds zero insulation, just a thin layer of burlap between you and the cold wood. It makes no discernible difference to the chill seeping up. This sack is truly the most unhelpful survival item in history. I mean, even a single matchstick would offer more potential. A quirky tidbit, some extremely isolated watchtowers or posts in remote areas would have a designated warming barrel, a large insulated barrel or box partially filled with straw or animal hides that a single person could huddle inside for temporary relief from the cold, a bit like a vertical coffin of warmth. Clearly, this tower didn't come with the warming barrel upgrade package. Pity, would have been quite cozy. You look at the sack again, then at the stool, then at the freezing floorboards. The reality of your situation is stark. You have no way to generate heat and minimal means to conserve it effectively in these conditions. Your survival hinges entirely on whether your body can somehow maintain its core temperature long enough for the storm to pass, or for help to arrive, which given the blizzard seems highly unlikely anytime soon. It's a waiting game against the cold, and the cold has a significant home field advantage. Historians still argue whether the standard provisions for remote outposts in harsh climates, particularly in earlier centuries, were genuinely insufficient, or if the expected resilience and training of the personnel were simply much higher, assuming they could improvise and endure with very basic supplies. You're definitely testing the improvisation and endurance theory right now, and it's not going great. You shift on the stool, trying to find a slightly less uncomfortable position. Your muscles are starting to feel stiff and heavy with the cold. The dampness in the air seems to penetrate everything. You need to stay awake, stay moving enough to keep circulation, but also conserve energy. It's a precarious balance. The thought of trying to sleep is terrifying. Falling asleep in this cold is a classic way to never wake up. But the sheer exhaustion is beginning to creep in, a heavy cloak settling over your mind. You are cold, you are tired, and you are alone in a creaking tower against a raging Russian blizzard. It's just you, the storm, and a very useless sack. The struggle against sleep is becoming real now. It's a heavy, insistent pressure behind your eyes, a dull ache in your head that seems to resonate with the low thrum of the wind outside. You know, intellectually, that sleeping is dangerous. Your body temperature is already dropping, and allowing yourself to drift off will only accelerate that process, making you vulnerable to the insidious creep of hypothermia. But knowing something and feeling capable of fighting it are two very different things. It's like knowing that eating a whole tub of ice cream before bed is a bad idea, but the temptation is just right there. You shift on the rickety stool again, trying to alleviate the stiffness in your limbs. Every movement feels sluggish, requiring conscious effort. Your fingers, though not yet losing sensation entirely, are clumsy and less responsive. It's hard to even flex them properly. You try wiggling your toes inside your boots, generating a tiny bit of warmth, but it's fleeting. The cold is like a physical presence pressing in on you from all sides, trying to squeeze the warmth right out of you. Maybe you missed something. A hidden nook, a forgotten box. Anything that could offer the slightest bit of help. You force yourself to stand up, moving slowly and deliberately to avoid knocking over the unstable stool or stumbling in the gloom. The space is small, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, mostly empty save for the base of the ladder and the stool. You shuffle along the rough-hewn stone wall, running your gloved hand over the icy surface. It's just stone. Solid, unforgivingly cold stone. No cracks, no shelves, no hidden compartments. This wasn't designed for long-term habitation, just a brief pause before ascending the ladder. What about your pockets? You haven't really checked them properly. Maybe, just maybe, you have something useful tucked away. It's a long shot, A desperate hope, but you have to try. You start with your coat pockets. Your fingers are stiff and awkward as you try to navigate the thick fabric. You pull out nothing. Just a few crumbs from a long-eaten biscuit, utterly useless for warmth or sustenance. A small, smooth stone you picked up somewhere, for no particular reason. A knotted bit of string. Riveting. It's like finding treasure if treasure was entirely pointless. Next, your trousers pockets. Again, clumsy fingers fumbling against the cold material. You pull out a handkerchief. Thin cotton, damp with condensation from your breath. Absolutely zero thermal value. A few loose coins, not exactly currency that can buy you a roaring fire out here. And is that it? You turn them inside out. Yep, that's it. Your worldly possessions in this moment consist of the clothes on your back, a useless sack, a wobbly stool, and pocket lint. Rich, you are not. The sheer inadequacy of your situation is almost comical, in a dark gallows humor sort of way. Here you are, in a life or death struggle against the elements, and your inventory is less impressive than a kindergartner's pocket contents. Okay, team, our survival kit includes 1 damp hanky, 3 coppers, and some excellent quality pocket fluff. We're saved. The cold is starting to affect your thinking. It's harder to concentrate. Your thoughts feel a little fuzzy around the edges. This is one of the early signs of hypothermia, cognitive impairment. Your body is prioritizing blood flow to your core organs, reducing circulation to your extremities and your brain. It's a built-in survival mechanism, but it makes rational decision-making tricky. You have to fight it, force yourself to think clearly, to stay alert. Mainstream historical fact. One of the greatest dangers in extreme cold is the deceptive feeling of warmth that can occur in the later stages of hypothermia. As the body's temperature drops severely, the blood vessels near the skin paradoxically dilate, leading to a brief, false sensation of warmth. This can cause individuals to feel hot and even remove clothing, which is incredibly dangerous and often a final, fatal mistake. You shiver violently, a deep, uncontrolled tremor that shakes your entire body. This is another sign. Your body trying desperately to generate heat through muscle activity. It burns energy rapidly, energy you can't afford to lose, but you can't stop it. You hug yourself tighter, hunching back onto the stool, trying to curl into a ball to minimize heat loss. The sack lies discarded nearby, a testament to its utter uselessness. Maybe you could try wrapping your feet in it. You pick it up, but it's too small, too thin. It's like wrapping your feet in a single damp newspaper. A quirky tidbit. In some historical accounts of extreme cold survival, individuals would resort to burying themselves shallowly in snowdrifts or constructing small snow caves. Intuitively, snow can act as an insulator, trapping body heat better than exposure to open air and wind chill, provided the snow is dry and packed correctly. However, doing this incorrectly can lead to rapid cooling, and you'd need tools and knowledge you absolutely do not possess right now. Plus, this isn't loose snow, it's a howling blizzard. Snow caves are probably not on the menu. Your eyelids feel incredibly heavy. Just a few minutes of rest, you tell yourself. Just close your eyes for a moment. The voice is insidious, tempting. It promises relief, a temporary escape from the biting cold and the relentless wind. But you know better, or rather, you hope you know better. You slap your cheeks lightly, the sting bringing a brief moment of focus. You try talking to yourself, whispering against the roar of the storm, recounting anything you can think of. Historical dates, song lyrics, the ingredients of a favorite meal. Anything to keep your mind active, to push back against the encroaching fog. It's like trying to hold back a tide with a sieve. Historians still argue whether the famous retreats and campaigns conducted through harsh Russian winters, such as Napoleon's in 1812 or parts of World War II, were primarily undone by military tactics, logistical failures, or the sheer, brutal, and underestimated power of the Russian winter itself on unprepared troops. You're getting a very personal, very convincing argument for the latter right now. The cold seems to be sinking deeper, reaching places within you that feel untouchable. Your bones ache, your muscles are tight and protesting. You try wiggling your fingers and toes again, but the effort feels immense. The desire to just lie down, to curl up on the floor and give in to the exhaustion is almost overwhelming. Every cell in your body screams for warmth, for rest, for relief. But the tiny, desperate spark of survival instinct knows that yielding now is the end. You are locked in a silent, brutal wrestling match with the elements, and the first one to tire loses. You just have to hold on somehow in this frozen, lonely box against the fury of the blizzard. The ladder, it looms above you in the dimness, disappearing into the black void of the upper tower. Maybe there's something up there, something useful? It's a desperate thought, a thin thread of hope in the crushing reality of your situation. You need to move anyway, to keep the blood flowing, to fight the inertia that threatens to glue you to this uncomfortable stool, and then, inevitably, to the floor. Standing again requires effort. Your legs feel heavy, stiff. You reach out and grip the icy rung of the ladder. It's a simple wooden structure. Sturdy but old, the wood worn smooth in places by countless hands over the decades. As you start to climb, each movement is deliberate, cautious. The cold wood bites into your gloved hands, even through the material. You ascend slowly, the air growing even colder with each foot you gain. The wind howls louder up here, vibrating the entire tower structure. It feels like the blizzard is trying to shake you right off the wall. It's dark above, truly dark. The light filtering in from the snow-covered windows downstairs is completely gone. You have to feel your way, rung by rung. Your muscles protest, unused to this kind of strain in the cold. Remember that time you tried rock climbing indoors and felt like you were going to fall after 3 feet? This is like that, but with actual, freezing, potentially fatal consequences. And no safety harness, obviously. Finally, your head clears the opening at the top of the ladder. You pull yourself up onto a narrow platform. It's slightly wider than the ladder opening, maybe just enough space to stand precariously. You're now right beneath the small windows that ring the top of the tower. These are the observation ports, meant for spotting fires in the distant forests. Tonight, they offer a terrifying, swirling view of white chaos. The wind up here is unbelievable. It screams through the gaps around the windows, creating a constant, deafening shriek. Snow and ice crystals are being blasted through the smallest cracks, stinging your face despite your efforts to shield it. There's absolutely nothing up here but the structural beams of the tower roof and the openings for the windows. No walls, really, just knee-high sills and then the openings. It's like being inside a giant, freezing wind tunnel. Disappointment washes over you, cold and sharp. Of course. What were you expecting? A heated lounge? A vending machine with hot chocolate? This is a functional, historical fire-watching tower, not a 5-star resort. It was built for necessity, not for sheltering stranded, freezing wanderers during epic blizzards. The wind whips at your clothes, threatening to tear them right off you. It's even colder up here than downstairs, exposed directly to the fury of the storm. You lean gingerly against a heavy wooden beam, trying to catch your breath, which comes out in ragged white clouds. The air is so cold it burns your lungs. The platform is slick with a fine layer of ice blasted in by the wind. One wrong step and you're falling back down the ladder, which would probably be a slightly quicker, but equally unpleasant way to go. You try to peer through one of the observation windows, holding your hand up to shield your eyes from the swirling snow outside. It's hopeless. Visibility is zero. You can't see anything beyond a few feet of raging white. The world outside this tower is gone, swallowed by the storm. This confirms it. Waiting for someone to spot the tower or you is not an option. Nobody is spotting anything out there tonight. Mainstream historical fact: fire-watching towers or lookout towers have been used for centuries across the world, particularly in vast forested areas like Russia, the United States, and Canada. They served as crucial early warning systems, allowing trained observers to scan the landscape for signs of smoke and pinpoint the location of wildfires before they grew too large to control. The observer often had a map and alidade to take bearings to smoke, allowing them to triangulate the fire's position. You shiver violently again, the tremor even more pronounced up here. The cold is simply relentless. There is nothing to shelter behind up here. No place to hunker down that offers any real protection from the wind. It's just slightly less exposed than being outside, but not by much. This platform is a death trap in this weather. Going back downstairs is the only sensible option. A quirky tidbit: in some particularly isolated or remote fire lookout towers in the early 20th century, especially in the American West, supplies like food, water, and even reading material were sometimes delivered by parachute drops from aircraft, as accessing the tower by foot or vehicle could be extremely difficult or impossible, depending on terrain and weather. Imagine waiting for your potato delivery, hoping it doesn't land in a ravine. As you begin your careful descent, the cold seems to have stiffened your joints even further. Each downward step on the ladder is a negotiation with gravity and ice. Your fingers ache with the effort of gripping the rungs. The brief ascent has exhausted you further, burning precious energy for absolutely no gain. You've merely confirmed that the top floor is even worse than the bottom. Progress. Historians still argue whether the decline in the use of traditional firewatching towers in the late 20th and early 21st centuries was primarily due to the rise of aerial surveillance, satellite imagery, and ground patrols, or if it was also influenced by changing land management practices and budget constraints that favored other methods. Either way, many of these old towers stand silent now, relics of a different era, like this one providing excellent, if slightly terrifying, historical context. You reach the bottom, legs trembling slightly from the exertion and the cold. You collapse back onto the stool, shivering uncontrollably. The brief movement helped for a moment, but now the cold feels even more intense, having been amplified by the biting wind upstairs. That was pointless. Utterly, completely pointless. You gain nothing, lost energy, and confirm that your immediate environment offers precisely zero viable options for survival in this storm. The tower is just a slightly less exposed part of the blizzard. It's a box, a stone and wood box, and you are trapped inside it with the cold. The fight against sleep intensifies, a heavy blanket of exhaustion threatening to smother your consciousness. Giving in would be so easy, so final. The cold seeps deeper into your bones. That brief, futile excursion upstairs only amplified the misery. You're back on the stool, hunched over, trying to make yourself smaller, conserve what little heat you have left. The idea of survival feels increasingly ridiculous, a cruel joke played by the universe. But a flicker of something, stubbornness, desperation, ignites in your mind. Fire. You need fire. It's the most basic, fundamental survival tool. Warmth. A way to dry things out. Maybe even a signal, though the thought of anyone seeing a signal through this blizzard is laughable. Still, it's a task, a distraction. Anything is better than just sitting here waiting to freeze. Getting up again is a monumental effort. Every muscle screams in protest. You hobble around the cramped ground floor of the tower, peering into corners, under the crude wooden table, behind the remaining splintered furniture. What could possibly burn? There are a few broken pieces of wood, remnants of the table maybe, scattered around. They look damp, almost waterlogged from the drafts and snow seepage. Not ideal fuel, but maybe. There's also some old paper, faded and brittle, probably forgotten notes or logs from the fire watchman. It's thin, probably good for tinder if you can get it going. Not much else. No dry branches, no forgotten coal stash, not even a box of matches conveniently left behind. Of course not. That would be too easy. This isn't a movie where the hero always finds exactly what they need in the nick of time. This is this. You gather the damp wood scraps and the brittle paper. You find a relatively sheltered spot near the center of the room, away from the main drafts. Though sheltered in this tower is a relative term. The floor is cold stone. You kneel down, the chill instantly seeping through your trousers. Your fingers are numb, clumsy even inside your gloves. You pull them off gingerly. You'll need the dexterity, even if it means frostbite. The biting cold on your bare skin is immediate, shocking. Okay, deep breaths, or shallow ones, whatever uses less energy. You try to arrange the paper into a small pile. It resists, crumbling instead of folding neatly. This is not good tinder. It's more like historical dust pressed into paper shape. You try to fluff it up, create some air pockets. Your fingers ache, stiff and unresponsive. It's like trying to do origami with sausages. You layer the smallest, dampest wood scraps over it, trying to create a tiny structure. It looks pathetic. A little damp funeral pyre for your hopes and dreams. Now, how to light it? You don't have matches or a lighter. What do you have? You rummage through your pockets. A few coins, a pocket knife. Blades are dull, but maybe steel. A handkerchief, damp. And wait, is that a flint and steel? You vaguely remember putting one in your pack before you left, thinking it might be useful. A surge of something that isn't soul-crushing despair washes over you. A tiny, fragile wave of actual, unironic hope. Okay, flint and steel. You need something to catch the spark. The paper is questionable. Maybe that damp handkerchief? You try to shred a piece of the paper first. It just flakes apart. Useless. You look at the handkerchief. It's cotton, if you can dry it slightly. But how? You try rubbing a small corner between your frozen hands. It doesn't seem to do much. Maybe just try the paper? What have you got to lose besides the last shred of your dignity? You hold the flint against the paper scraps. Gripping the steel striker is difficult with your numb fingers. You try to strike down, aiming sparks onto the paper. Clink, 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 nothing. Just sparks scattering uselessly. You try again. Harder. Clink, clink, scrape. A few sparks land on the paper, fizzle, and die instantly. The paper is too damp. The air is too cold. Everything is working against you. Mainstream historical fact. Before matches became widely available in the mid-19th century, flint and steel were common methods for starting fires, often used in conjunction with char cloth, fabric that has been charred but being heated in a low-oxygen environment, which catches a spark easily and then smolders, allowing you to blow it into flame when adding tinder. Simply striking sparks on a raw tinder like damp paper or wood shavings was much less reliable. You try different angles. You try scraping faster. You try slower. Your hand cramps. Your fingers feel like blocks of ice. The sparks continue to scatter, beautiful but useless in the oppressive cold and dampness. You are acutely aware of how precious your energy is, how quickly it's being expended on this fruitless task. Each failed strike feels like another tiny nail in your metaphorical coffin. A quirky tidbit: some indigenous peoples in extreme cold environments developed incredibly sophisticated fire-starting techniques using materials like carefully prepared dried grasses, certain types of fungi, or even bird down mixed with a bit of fat or resin. Understanding the critical need for bone-dry, easily ignitable tinder in freezing conditions. They weren't messing around with damp historical dust paper. You pause, shivering violently, trying to warm your hands by tucking them under your armpits. It's barely effective. The cold is winning. This fire attempt is failing. You look at the pathetic pile of damp paper and wood. It looks back, unimpressed. It knows it's not going to burn. You know it's not going to burn, but giving up feels even worse. Historians still argue whether the knowledge of complex fire-starting techniques was primarily passed down through direct apprenticeship and oral tradition, or if there were more widespread methods of sharing such vital survival information across different communities in harsh climates before the advent of modern communication and standardized guides. Either way, that knowledge isn't helping you now. You pick up the striker again, determined to try just a few more times. Maybe if you can get one good spark, one tiny ember. You strike, and again, and again. Nothing, just the sound of metal on rock and the scattering of cold light that dies before it lives. Your hands are shaking with cold and fatigue. The damp paper is just getting wetter, or maybe that's just condensation from your breath. It doesn't matter, it's not going to work. You finally drop the flint and steel. They clatter on the stone floor. The sound is loud in the stillness of the tower, a punctuation mark on your failure. You sink back onto your heels, then slowly manage to push yourself back onto the stool. The cold feels even more absolute now. the absence of warmth, a tangible weight. You wasted energy. You failed. The fight against sleep is becoming overwhelmingly difficult. The idea of just letting go, drifting off, it's so appealing, so warm, so quiet. That felt bad. Really, truly bad. The utter soul-crushing failure of the fire attempt hangs in the air like a new layer of ice. You're back on the stool, hands still aching from the pointless striking of flint against steel, shivering uncontrollably now. The cold isn't just on your skin. It feels like it's radiating from the inside out, originating somewhere deep in your core. Every breath feels like inhaling tiny shards of ice. The tower seems to mock you with its vast, empty, freezing space. This big, drafty box isn't shelter. It's just a slightly slower way to freeze than being outside. Unless you make the box smaller, or more accurately, make a smaller, slightly less leaky box. Inside the big box, it's a classic survival move, right? Reduce the space you need to heat, minimize exposure. Find a corner, block the drafts, huddle down. It's not exactly building an igloo, but it's better than just sitting here in the middle of a wind tunnel. Getting up again is a Herculean feat. Your knees crack, your back protests, and your limbs feel heavy and unresponsive, like logs of wood that have been left out all winter. You shuffle stiffly across the stone floor, moving with the grace of a heavily sedated walrus. Finding the right corner is key. You need one that seems least exposed to the main drafts coming from the boarded-up window and the gaps around the door. You try the corner where you found that blessed piece of canvas earlier. Yes, that one seems slightly better. The stone walls meet at a 90-degree angle, offering at least some protection from wind coming across the room. Now, materials. What can you use to block the drafts and create a barrier? There's that canvas, thankfully still draped near where you left it. It's stiff with cold and dampness, but it's something. You pull it free from the wall, the rough material scraping against the stone. You'll need to arrange it to form a sort of wall or roof over your little nook. What else? Those broken pieces of furniture might work as makeshift windbreaks, even if they're just damp wood. You gather the splintered legs and bits of tabletop from your failed fire-starting attempt. They're heavy and awkward, and your numb fingers struggle to grip them properly. It's like trying to pick up greasy bowling balls with mittens on. You start arranging the furniture pieces in the corner, trying to lean them against the walls or against each other to form a low barrier. The canvas is the tricky part. You try to drape it over the top, creating a low ceiling, but it keeps slipping. It's also not quite big enough to cover the entire corner effectively. You try propping it up with a piece of wood, but it just falls over. It feels utterly pathetic, like a 3-year-old trying to build the world's saddest blanket fort. Except instead of cozy warmth and imaginary adventures, you're facing hypothermia and the crushing reality of being trapped alone in a freezing tower. Just slightly different vibes, you know? You finally manage to get the canvas somewhat secured, using a combination of leaning it against the walls and trapping the edges under the heavier wood scraps. It's not airtight by any stretch of the imagination, but it does create a smaller, more enclosed space. It feels marginally less exposed inside this little hovel of cold stone, damp canvas, and broken wood. You carefully maneuver the stool inside, placing it in the center of your new, tiny kingdom of misery. Sitting down feels like a victory, albeit a very minor, frostbitten one. You pull the edges of the canvas around you as much as possible, trying to create a cocoon. It's still incredibly cold, don't misunderstand. But the direct blast of the wind seems slightly less intense inside this micro-shelter. You can still feel the draft snaking around the edges, chilling your ankles and the back of your neck. But maybe, just maybe, it will slow down the rate at which your body heat is escaping into the void. Mainstream historical fact. Traditional Russian peasant houses, known as izbas, were typically built from logs and were designed specifically to retain heat in harsh winters. They often had a large central stove, a pech, made of clay or brick, which served as the primary heat source, cooking surface, and even a warm place to sleep on top of. The small windows and low ceilings were also features designed to conserve heat, a stark contrast to the lofty, drafty design of this tower. You huddle deeper into your coat, trying to make yourself as small as possible. The canvas smells musty and damp. The stone floor under your feet is radiating cold like some kind of anti-heater. You try tucking your hands into your armpits again, flexing your fingers occasionally to encourage circulation, though they still feel like foreign objects attached to your wrists. Every movement is deliberate, slow, aimed at conserving energy. It takes monumental effort just to shift your weight. Moving feels like wading through frozen treacle, if treacle could also bite with icy teeth. A quirky tidbit: in some extremely cold regions historically, people would share their living spaces with their livestock, not just for security, but because the animal's body heat could significantly contribute to warming the dwelling, essentially turning the barn into a living, breathing furnace extension. While perhaps not the most appealing roommate situation by modern standards, it was a practical, albeit pungent, survival strategy. Thankfully, or perhaps regrettably, you don't have a hay or a few sheep to share this tower with. The sound of the blizzard outside seems slightly muffled within your little canvas fort, but it's still a constant, menacing roar. It's a reminder of the overwhelming power of nature against your flimsy, damp defenses. You close your eyes for a moment, just resting them, not trying to sleep. Oh no, just a quick break. But the pull is strong. The cold makes you lethargic, makes sleep seem like the most logical, most comforting option. Historians still argue whether the relative isolation of many rural communities in places like 19th century Russia led to the independent development of unique cold weather survival techniques, or if there was more transmission of knowledge regarding building practices, fire starting, and resource management between villages and regions than previously thought, especially considering the vast distances and limited communication methods. You, however, could really use any knowledge right now. Transmitted by carrier pigeon, telegraph, or interpretive dance doesn't matter. You open your eyes again. Still here, still cold. The makeshift shelter isn't a miracle cure, not by a long shot, but it's slightly less bad, maybe. It's hard to tell if it's actually warmer or if it's just the psychological comfort of having tried on something. You shift on the stool, trying to find a more comfortable position, one that exposes less skin to the icy air. The silence inside the tower, broken only by the wind's howl and your own shaky breaths, is profound. It's the kind of silence that feels heavy, full of unspoken threats in the immense, indifferent weight of the blizzard outside. The fight continues, minute by agonizing minute. All right, so the sad little fort is a thing. It's not doing much for the temperature, but it feels slightly better to be tucked into a smaller space. Psychologically, it's something, I guess. But as you sit there shivering, pulling the damp canvas tighter, another discomfort starts to make itself known. Subtle at first, then growing insistent. You're thirsty, like really thirsty, which seems counterintuitive, right? You're surrounded by snow, ice. The whole world outside is literally frozen water. And yet, your mouth feels dry, your lips are starting to crack, and there's a dull ache behind your eyes. Dehydration. It's a sneaky killer, even in the cold. People often forget about it in winter, thinking that because they aren't sweating like crazy, they don't need water. But your body is still losing moisture just through breathing, especially in dry, cold air, and also as it works overtime to try and stay warm. Plus, the cold can actually suppress your thirst response, making it harder to recognize you need to drink until you're already quite dehydrated. It's kind of a cruel joke by Mother Nature. Here's all the water you could ever want. Just try and make it drinkable without killing yourself. The obvious source is the snow piled up outside, or maybe even the ice that's forming on the inside of the window panes and doors. There's no shortage of frozen water. The problem is you can't just scoop it up and wolf it down like a snow cone at a summer carnival. Eating snow raw is a terrible idea in a survival situation. Why? Because your body has to use precious energy it desperately needs to keep you warm, to melt that snow internally. It actively cools you down from the inside, accelerating hypothermia. You'd have to eat a massive amount to get any meaningful hydration. And all that effort would just deplete your core temperature further. It's like trying to heat your house by opening the freezer door. Just No, the proper way to hydrate from snow or ice is to melt it first. Get it into a liquid state before it enters your body. This allows you to absorb the water efficiently without sacrificing your internal furnace, which, historically speaking, was usually done by heating it over a fire. Fire. Remember that whole fiasco from the last section? Yeah, no fire means no easy way to melt snow. So you're back to square one or maybe square -5. You look around the tower, hoping against hope that maybe, just maybe, there's a kettle or a pot or something that miraculously wasn't burned or scavenged or hasn't rusted into oblivion. Of course there isn't, just the broken furniture, the damp canvas, the stool, and the indifferent stone walls. So how do you melt snow without a heat source? This is where it gets really grim and really slow. You could try melting it with body heat. Pick up a handful of snow, cup it in your freezing hands, maybe stuff a bit inside your coat pocket or even under your armpit if you can bear the initial icy shock. It sounds ridiculous, and it is. You decide to try. You cautiously shuffle out of your little fort, exposing yourself back to the wider, slightly draftier room, and make your way to the boarded-up window where some snow has drifted through a gap and piled up on the inside sill. It's hard, granular stuff, not soft powder. You scoop up a handful, the sensation like plunging your already numb fingers into liquid nitrogen. It stings and aches. You try to cup your hands around it, breathing on it, rubbing your palms together slightly, which just seems to spread the cold around your fingers. A tiny bit of moisture starts to form, like a pathetic tear on the surface of the snowball. It's laughably slow. You'd need to do this for hours, maybe days, just to get a few mouthfuls of water. It feels like trying to empty a swimming pool with a teaspoon made of ice. Another method is to put the snow inside something, a container if you had one, which you don't, and then put that something against your body. Since you lack containers, you consider creative alternatives. Could you put snow inside a glove? Maybe, or even, and this thought makes you recoil, directly inside your coat against your chest. The sheer cold would be agonizing, and the resulting dampness would only make you colder in the long run. It feels like a desperation move that might do more harm than good. Mainstream historical fact: surviving extreme cold historically often relied on careful management of hydration and food intake. Arctic explorers and indigenous peoples alike understood that consuming adequate calories, particularly fat, provided fuel for the body's internal furnace, and staying properly hydrated was essential for various bodily functions, including regulating temperature. Starvation and dehydration made individuals much more susceptible to hypothermia and frostbite. You sit back down on the stool, inside your canvas lean-to, defeated by the snow-melting challenge. Your hand still aches from the cold. The thirst is still there, a constant, irritating reminder of another basic need that seems impossible to meet. It's just another layer of misery on top of the cold, the hunger, the isolation, and the sheer crushing boredom. Add thirst to the list of things that are slowly grinding you down. It's almost impressive how many ways this situation is trying to be uncomfortable. A quirky tidbit: some survival guides suggest that in desperate situations without a heat source, you can theoretically melt snow by placing small amounts in your mouth, allowing body heat to melt it before swallowing. However, this is widely considered inefficient and still poses the risk of rapidly chilling your core, especially if you try to do it with significant amounts. It's more of a theoretical last resort than a practical strategy, kind of like trying to knit a sweater out of cobwebs. Possible in principle, but not really helping your overall situation. The silence in the tower is punctuated only by the distant howl of the wind and your own increasingly ragged breaths. Each exhale creates a tiny cloud of vapor in the frigid air. You watch them dissipate, disappearing into the vast coldness of the tower, like tiny pieces of your life force drifting away. The irony of being surrounded by frozen water but dying of thirst is not lost on you. It's a cruel, poetic kind of terrible. Historians still argue whether the nutritional value and hydration provided by certain traditional foods consumed in extremely cold climates, such as fatty meats or specific preparations of fish, were fully understood scientifically by the people who relied on them, or if their effectiveness was primarily discovered and passed down through generations of empirical trial and error in harsh environments. Either way, you'd trade all the scholarly debate in the world for a lukewarm glass of water right now. You rest your head back against the cold stone wall. The thirst is becoming a more dominant sensation than the hunger now. It feels like your insides are drying up. You lick your lips, feeling the rough, cracked skin. It's a small, desperate gesture. You know intellectually that you need water to survive, just like you need warmth and food. And right now, all three seem equally out of reach. The snow outside continues to fall, adding to the insurmountable white barrier that surrounds you. It's a landscape of plenty, utterly inaccessible. The wait continues minute by minute, hour by hour, in this cold, dry, desolate tower. The ache of thirst settles in. It's not a sudden, sharp pain, but a deep, resonant hum throughout your body. A reminder that something fundamental is missing. The frantic attempts to melt snow with body heat feel pathetic in retrospect, like trying to bail out a sinking ship with a sieve. It yielded nothing but colder hands and a reinforced sense of futility. Every breath feels dry, scraping against the back of your throat. Your tongue feels heavy and thick. It's the kind of thirst that makes you fantasize about the most mundane liquids. Lukewarm tap water, maybe even that slightly questionable water from a garden hose back in a different life. Anything wet. The tower, which a little while ago felt like a refuge, albeit a drafty one, now feels like a wake specifically designed to deny you the one thing you desperately need. You eye the ice forming on the inside of the window panes again. It looks so clean, so pure, sparkling faintly in the dim light that filters through the gaps. But you know the drill now. Eating it is bad. Melting it without heat is nearly impossible. You could chip off a tiny shard, hold it in your mouth, and let it slowly melt. A method some desperate people have tried. The logical part of your brain screams that this is inefficient and risks chilling you further. But the thirsty part is whispering temptations. You resist for now. It's a sign of how far things have deteriorated when a tiny sliver of ice seems like a possible, yet terrible solution. You start looking around the tower again, a more desperate search this time. Not just for something to burn, which is a lost cause, but for anything that might hold liquid or be useful for gathering it. You check under the remaining pieces of furniture, splinters, dust, maybe a dead spider. You run your hand along the floorboards near the walls, hoping for a crack that might have collected melted snow from a past, less severe storm. Ridiculous, you know, but you look anyway. You examine the burnt section near the ladder, poking cautiously at the blackened timber, finding only cold char and soot that gets on your fingers. There's nothing. No forgotten water skin, no rusty tin cup that might catch condensation, no secret stash of samovar tea. This place was a fire tower, not a well-stocked pantry. This intense focus on water makes you reevaluate your other dwindling resources. You still have those dry biscuits, the questionable cured meat, and maybe a few other odds and ends if you were lucky enough to find them earlier. Up until now, the hunger was manageable, something you could ignore or just feel as a dull ache. But now the thirst dominates, and it makes you think about conservation on a whole new level. You're not just rationing food, you're rationing effort, movement, hope, and you definitely need to ration any potential access to water, no matter how slim. The idea of rationing brings a cold, logical clarity to the situation, which is almost worse than the panic desperation. If you did manage to melt a tiny bit of snow, you'd have to dole it out in sips. Every calorie consumed requires water to process. Every movement makes you breathe harder, losing more moisture. So you huddle down even tighter in your canvas fort. Moving less means conserving energy, generating less internal heat to lose, and hopefully, just maybe, slowing down the rate at which you dehydrate. It's a passive form of survival, a slow surrender to inactivity, driven by necessity. It's intensely boring. The silence outside the canvas is oppressive, broken only by the wind or the occasional groan of the old tower structure. Inside your small space, it's just you and your thoughts, which are increasingly dominated by the physical discomforts and the sheer monotony. How long have you been here now? Days? A week? Time starts to blur together when every hour is just a repetition of cold, hunger, and thirst, punctuated by brief, failed attempts to improve things. Your brain, deprived of stimulation and water, might start playing tricks. Are those shadows moving? Did you hear something just outside your fort? Or was it just the blood rushing in your ears? Isolation in such conditions can have profound psychological effects. Beyond the obvious loneliness, there's the feeling of being utterly insignificant against the vast, indifferent power of the blizzard. It's easy for your thoughts to spiral, replaying past mistakes, imagining worst-case scenarios, or simply feeling the weight of hopelessness. You try to distract yourself, perhaps by tracing the patterns in the canvas with your finger, or focusing on the faint sound of your own breathing. But the thoughts always circle back to the cold, the hunger, and the burning, constant thirst. It's a vicious cycle. Mainstream historical fact. During long sieges or periods of being cut off by natural disaster in historical times, the ability to locate and purify water sources was often more critical than finding food. While the human body can survive for weeks without food, dehydration can become critical in just a few days, especially in harsh conditions where the body is working hard to maintain temperature. Many historical accounts of survival focus heavily on the desperate search for drinkable water. You find yourself idly chewing on a loose thread from the canvas just for the sensation of moisture, however imaginary. It does nothing. You lick your lips again, feeling the dry, rough texture. It's a constant, low-level torment. It reminds you of being a kid and being told not to drink from puddles or eat snow, advice that now seems both sensible and utterly useless in this context. You'd happily risk a tummy ache for a single gulp of cold, melted snow right now. A quirky tidbit. In some extreme cold survival scenarios documented later, like during polar expeditions, people sometimes tried drinking small amounts of animal blood, if available, to supplement hydration, as it contains water. This was often considered a last resort due to potential health risks and cultural taboos, but highlights the desperate lengths survivors would go to for liquid in water-scarce cold environments. Thankfully, you are not facing that particular dilemma in your drafty tower. Though the thought does make you feel slightly less sorry for yourself, which is a small mercy. The inaction is perhaps the hardest part. There's nothing to do that feels productive. You can't build a better shelter without materials, you can't make fire without fuel, and you can't get water without heat. You are essentially reduced to waiting, waiting for the storm to end, waiting for rescue, a faint, almost laughable hope, or simply waiting to succumb. The boring aspect of this survival scenario is its most insidious weapon. It wears you down not with sudden peril, but with grinding, relentless deprivation and the soul-crushing weight of doing nothing. Historians still argue whether the psychological resilience required for survival in extreme isolation, like that experienced by explorers or prisoners, is an innate personality trait or something that can be learned and developed through training and experience. Regardless, you suspect you're getting an involuntary crash course in it right now, and the professor is a relentless blizzard with a syllabus of thirst and cold. You close your eyes, trying to conserve energy, trying to drift towards sleep, but the thirst is a persistent physical noise in your head. It makes it hard to relax. Every dry breath feels like a tiny step backward from survival. You shift position on the stool, the movement feeling heavy and slow. The cold continues its relentless seep into your bones. The canvas offers only a symbolic barrier against the indifferent emptiness of the tower around you. You are trapped, thirsty, cold, and achingly bored. Okay, the ground floor assessment is complete. It's cold, drafty, but a definite improvement over being outside in the screaming blizzard. Still, you know deep down this level isn't where you'll be spending the next few days, if you're lucky enough to last that long. It's more of a windbreak than a home. Your gaze drifts back to the ladder, disappearing into the dark opening in the ceiling. Upwards is the only way forward. Survival rule number 1, explore your environment thoroughly. Or maybe rule number 2, after rule number 0, don't die immediately. Climbing a ladder in a drafty, old tower during a raging blizzard isn't exactly on anyone's bucket list, unless that bucket list is titled, Things I Regret Doing Immediately. But here you go. You grip the rough wood of the uprights, feeling the splinters that threaten to defy your modern, probably synthetic gloves. The rungs are worn smooth in the middle, a testament to countless feet that have ascended and descended this pathway over the years. It makes you wonder who they were. Lonely fire watchmen, occasional supply runners, perhaps even fleeing peasants seeking temporary refuge? Historians still argue whether these remote watchtowers were solely functional outposts or occasionally served as informal shelters for travelers caught out by the elements, especially during winter. As you start to climb, the air changes. It feels slightly less turbulent than the ground floor, but also somehow colder, as if the wind is just waiting for you up there, patiently pulling its icy breath. Each rung creaks under your weight. You can hear the structure groaning softly around you. Not in an "it's about to fall down" way, hopefully, but more in an "I am old and tired, please be gentle" kind of way. You haul yourself up one rung at a time, your muscles protesting slightly. This isn't climbing a gym wall, folks. This is proper, rustic, potentially splintery ascent. Try not to look down, or up, or anywhere really, except the next rung. Just focus on the movement. Finally, your head clears the opening in the ceiling. You pull yourself through, landing with a soft thud on a floor that feels more solid than you expected. You stand up slowly, brushing dust and stray wood shavings off your shoulders. You're now on the second level of the tower. The immediate impression? Cramped, very, very cramped. This isn't a spacious living area. It feels more like a glorified closet with windows. The ceiling is low, maybe only 7 feet high, making the space feel even more confined. The room is sparsely furnished, emphasizing the functional outpost aspect. There's a narrow, built-in wooden bunk bed along one wall, covered with a thin, lumpy mattress that looks like it's seen better centuries. Beside it is a small, roughly made table and a single stool. In the corner, there's a small, enclosed hearth, or perhaps a smaller, supplementary stovepipe, rising from below. Too small for the main fire, probably just for auxiliary heat or maybe boiling water. The walls are the same thick logs as below, but here they seem closer, more enclosing. 2 small high windows, one on either side of the room, are letting in a weak gray light, heavily diffused by the snow clinging to the glass in the swirling storm outside. You walk over to the bunk, testing its stability. It's sturdy enough, built directly into the log structure. The mattress is rough, probably filled with straw or horsehair. Definitely not memory foam. Sorry, folks. There's a thin, worn blanket folded neatly at the foot of the bunk. Everything about this space screams minimalist residency for one. There are signs someone lived here, and not just for a brief stopover. The wood of the table and stool is worn smooth in place from repeated use. There are small nicks and scratches on the walls, perhaps tally marks or idle carvings from long, boring hours. On the table, you find a few more items: a battered tin cup, a chipped ceramic bowl, a half-melted tallow candle in a simple holder, and a small leather-bound book. You pick up the book carefully. It's a ledger or journal of some kind. Its page is yellowed and brittle. You open it tentatively. The script is in Cyrillic, faded ink on rough paper. You can't read Russian, unfortunately, but seeing the handwritten entries, line after line, day after day, paints a vivid picture of solitary existence. This wasn't just a place to shelter. It was someone's post, someone's life for a period of time. It feels poignant looking at these traces of a person you'll never know, who sat right here, perhaps staring out at storms just like this one. A quirky tidbit: some historical records from similar watch posts include incredibly detailed, almost poetic descriptions of the weather written by the watchmen, sometimes incorporating local folklore about snow or wind patterns, suggesting they found ways to combat the isolation through observation and recording. You open the small hearth structure in the corner. Inside, there are a few burnt embers and a small pile of kindling. It looks like it could be used for a small fire, perhaps for cooking or just adding a little extra warmth to this specific space, separate from the main stove downstairs. This reinforces the idea that this was a living space, not just a lookout point. Someone cooked, ate, and slept here. The smell in the room is a faint mix of old wood, smoke, and something else, perhaps stale air and human occupancy. It's not exactly pleasant, but it's the smell of shelter. Checking the windows, you find they are double-paned, a concession to the harsh climate, but the seal between the panes is far from perfect. Cold air seeps through, frosting the inner glass. The view outside is still just a maelstrom of white. You can hear the wind howling around the tower with renewed ferocity at this height, whistling through unseen cracks. It feels slightly more exposed up here, closer to the elements, but the structure seems to be holding firm against the onslaught. Old Russian log construction, when done properly with massive interlocking timbers, is incredibly robust and resistant to high winds and heavy snow loads, a testament to centuries of building in harsh environments. That's a solid mainstream historical fact you can appreciate right now. Looking around the cramped space again, you notice small details. A hook on the wall that might have held a coat, a faint, dark stain on the floor near the table that could be spilled tea, or something less savory. Spider webs in the corners holding dust like miniature gray flags. This place has been used, and used for extended periods. The isolation must have been intense, especially in winter. Imagine sitting here for weeks on end, with only the storm for company, watching for fires that would be impossible to see in this weather anyway. Sounds like my ideal vacation spot, honestly. Said no one ever. You assess the minimal furniture. The bunk provides a place to lie down, the table a surface for eating or writing, the stool a place to sit. There's no storage other than maybe under the bunk or table. Everything needed had to be compact and basic. This wasn't about comfort, it was about function and endurance. You can almost feel the presence of the previous occupants, their long hours of waiting, their meals eaten in silence, their nights spent listening to the wind. The evidence of long-term residency is clear. The wear on the furniture, the ledger book, the small hearth. It's a stark reminder that this tower isn't just a temporary structure. It's a post that has been occupied, albeit intermittently, for years. Historians still argue whether the sheer isolation of these posts led to significant psychological strain on the watchmen, or if the solitude was sometimes preferred over crowded village life, especially for individuals seeking peace, or perhaps hiding from something. For you, right now, it just means this space is designed to be lived in, minimally, but lived in nonetheless. You spend a few more minutes taking in the details, absorbing the atmosphere of this small, high room. It feels like a step up, literally and figuratively, from the ground floor. It's more protected from the direct drafts, even if it's closer to the wind's howl. This cramped space, with its worn furniture and silent journal, is clearly the heart of the tower's function as a watch post in temporary home. You found your basic living quarters, such as they are. The main question now is, what else does the tower hold, and can any of it help you survive? You've thoroughly explored the cramped living quarters on the second level, noting the bunk, table, stovepipe, and the silent journal. It feels like you found the core of the tower, the place where the watchmen actually lived out their long, lonely shifts. But you know there must be one more level. This is a fire-watching tower, after all. The highest point is where the looking happens. So, after absorbing the melancholic quiet of the second floor, your gaze naturally lifts again, scanning the low ceiling above you. There it is, another opening, similar to the one you just came through, but perhaps a bit smaller. And another ladder, of course, because why walk when you can climb? Seems like the architect of this place had a real thing for vertical transportation. Maybe they were training for the Tower of Babel marathon, who knows? Anyway, duty calls, or rather, survival calls. You need to see what the top level offers. It's the last frontier in this little wooden world you've stumbled into. Getting to the second floor was one thing. Climbing higher, into what feels like the teeth of the storm, is another. You approach the ladder. It looks older, maybe less used than the one below, or just more exposed to the elements that seep down from above. The wood is rougher, darker in places, and a thin layer of icy frost seems to have settled on the top few rungs visible through the opening. This level must be much colder, much closer to the outside temperature. You place your hands on the rough wood again, feeling the familiar sting of cold and potential splinters. You take a deep breath, Here we go. 1 foot on the bottom rung. It holds. Good. Another breath and you begin to ascend. The ladder creaks louder than the one below, a mournful sound that seems to echo the wind's howl outside. The air grows noticeably colder with each rung, biting at any exposed skin around your gloves or collar. As you climb, the noises of the storm intensify. The wind isn't just howling now, it's shrieking, battering the tower with a terrifying force you could not quite appreciate on the lower levels. You can hear the structure groaning and protesting more vigorously up here. Not just the gentle sighs from before, but louder, deeper vibrations that transmit through the ladder and into your hands and feet. It feels like being inside a giant, old drum being pounded by an invisible, angry giant. You finally reach the top opening. Pulling yourself through is a bit more awkward this time, partly due to fatigue, partly because the space feels tighter. You tumble onto a floor that's definitely colder than the one below, but again, surprisingly solid. You get to your feet, shivering slightly despite your layers. You're on the topmost level. The lookout level, the first thing you notice is the light. It's much brighter up here, despite the storm. That's because this level is dominated by windows. Not just small, high ones like downstairs, but large, multi-pane windows on all 4 sides of the tower. Or at least that's the intention. Right now, they're mostly obscured by a thick, swirling white. You can make out the shapes of the window frames and the ghostly, distorted forms of the landscape outside, but the visibility is effectively zero. The wind lashes against the glass with a relentless fury, making a high-pitched whistling sound that is almost deafening. This level is smaller than the one below, perhaps only 15 feet across, and circular or octagonal, following the outer wall of the tower. The ceiling is lower still, maybe 6.5 feet. It feels less like a room and more like an enclosed platform. There's very little furniture, just a single sturdy wooden chair bolted to the floor in the center of the room, directly under where a hook in the ceiling suggests a lamp might have hung. The chair is positioned so someone could swivel to look out of any of the windows. Your eyes scan the space. Its primary purpose is obvious: looking. There's a narrow shelf running around the inside wall just below the windows. On the shelf, you find a few items. A small metal tube that might be a basic spyglass or telescope, designed for spotting distant smoke plumes on clear days. A few fragments of clay pipes in a small, weathered tin box that rattles when you pick it up. Empty, of course, because finding useful things is apparently not on the menu tonight. There's also a hook on the wall, perhaps for hanging a coat or equipment, and that's pretty much it. Bare bones, all about the view. You walk over to one of the windows, wiping a patch of condensation with your glove. The glass is thick but distorted, and the snow outside is pressing against it in places, whipped into drifts by the wind. You can feel the cold radiating intensely from the panes. The wind howls past, finding every tiny crack and seam, creating eerie whistles and groans. It's incredible how much sound the wind makes at this height. It feels like the tower is singing a protest song to the blizzard. You look at the chair in the center. Imagine sitting here for hours, days, weeks, staring out at the vast, empty landscape, waiting for a sign of fire that rarely came, especially in winter when everything is buried under snow. On clear summer days, the visibility from a tower like this would have been incredible, allowing watchmen to spot forest fires from dozens of miles away, providing crucial early warning. That's a solid mainstream historical fact. These towers were vital for preventing widespread forest destruction in areas with vast, remote woodlands. You pick up the metal tube, the spyglass. It's simple, probably not high magnification, maybe made of brass or tin. You hold it up to your eye and try to look out the window, but all you see is a swirling, chaotic blur of white and gray. It's completely useless in these conditions. It makes you wonder about the watchman's job in winter. What were they even looking for? Were they just there to maintain the post, or did they have other duties? Historians still argue whether winter watchmen in such remote posts were expected to maintain active fire vigilance, or if their role shifted primarily to weather observation, post maintenance, and acting as emergency refuges, given the near impossibility of spotting distant fires in heavy snow. On the shelf, tucked away in a corner, you find something else. A small carved wooden bird, crudely but carefully made. It's simple, maybe a sparrow or a finch. It feels smooth under your fingers, worn from handling. A small personal touch in this purely functional space. Perhaps something the watchman carved to pass the endless hours, or maybe a good luck charm. This kind of small, personal artifact found in historical workspaces provides a quirky or fringe tidbit, hinting at the human element of these remote, solitary jobs. The need for small comforts or creative outlets to combat isolation. You check the floor. It seems solid, maybe reinforced. No other openings or ladders. This is the top, the absolute highest accessible point of the tower. You've explored everywhere. The ground floor, the living quarters, and now the lookout level. You have a full picture of the internal structure and layout. Standing here at the highest point, surrounded by the furious sounds of the storm, you feel incredibly isolated. Closer to the wind, closer to the cold, but also feeling the incredible resilience of this old wooden structure holding firm against forces that would tear modern buildings apart. It's a testament to simple, strong engineering and materials. No Wi-Fi up here, obviously, or even a decent cup of coffee. Just wood, wind, and loneliness. My kind of place. Not really. You look back at the sparse contents of the room, the chair, the shelf, the spyglass, the empty tin, the little wooden bird. Not exactly a treasure trove of survival gear. This level was purely for observation. Whatever you find to help you survive, likely going to be on the lower levels, where people actually spent time trying to live. But exploring was essential. You had to know what was here. Now you know. You know the layout, the basic function of each level, and the limited resources available. You've assessed the tower's structural integrity, at least the parts you've been in, the potential for shelter, and the available heat sources, the main stove downstairs, the small one upstairs. You know where you could potentially sleep, the bunk, where you might be able to make a small fire, both hearths, and how utterly useless looking outside is right now. With the exploration complete, the next step is to consolidate your findings, figure out what you actually have to work with, and make a plan. A boring, sensible survival plan based on the limited realities of a freezing 19th century Russian fire tower. It's not going to involve building a snowmobile out of spare parts or sending a distress signal via carrier pigeon. It's going to be much, much simpler and much, much colder. You descend the creaky ladder from the lookout level, leaving the furious shriek of the wind against the windows behind you. The relative quiet of the second floor feels almost peaceful by comparison, although the structure's deep groans are still present, a constant reminder of the forces battling outside. You step off the bottom rung, your feet landing softly on the worn wooden floorboards. The air here is less biting than up above, but still undeniably cold. The temperature is definitely dropping as the storm rages on. Now, with the exploration complete, it's time for the boring part, assessing the reality of the situation and making a plan. You've seen the tower from bottom to top. The ground floor offered some potential tools and storage, but felt too drafty and exposed, especially with the door potentially vulnerable. The top floor is purely for observation, freezing cold and useless in the current blizzard. That leaves the second floor. This is the watchman's living space, the place designed for habitation. It's got the bunk, the table, and crucially, the main stove. This is where you need to be. This is your base of operations for enduring the storm. You look around the small room again, seeing it now not just as a relic of the past, but as a potential refuge. The bunk is crude but functional. The table is solid. The hearth of the stove is dark and cold, but it's the key to warmth. Survival isn't about dramatic rescues or heroic feats right now. It's about managing immediate needs with extremely limited resources. It's about staying warm, staying hydrated, and waiting it out. A truly thrilling evening, I know. Edge of your seat stuff. First things first, warmth. The stove is the only viable heat source. But a stove needs fuel. Wood. You didn't see a massive wood pile in the room or even on the upper levels. There might be some stacked on the ground floor, near the main entrance, or perhaps in a small annex outside the tower base that you couldn't see clearly through the drifts. Or maybe, just maybe, there's a small supply kept here on the second floor for easy use. You start looking around near the stove. There's a metal poker leaning against the hearth, covered in old ash, and thankfully, tucked into a small alcove built into the wall next to the stove, there is some wood. Not a huge amount, maybe enough for a day or two if you're careful, but it's dry and seems ready to burn. There are also some smaller bits of kindling and some old newspaper or similar paper material that would work as tinder. Okay, this is good. This is doable. You have fuel and tinder. All you need now is a spark. You check your pockets. Assuming you had the foresight to bring some basic survival items or perhaps found something useful on the ground floor. Let's assume you found a bag of matches, possibly damp but maybe salvageable, or perhaps a flint and steel kit that might have been among the watchman's tools. Let's go with a small, antique metal tin of matches you found near the ground floor hearth, tucked away from the worst of the damp. They feel a bit brittle, maybe slightly humid, but they are there, a tiny hopeful sign. So the plan for warmth is simple. Get the stove going. You gather some kindling and tinder, placing it in the hearth. You carefully select one of the matches from the tin, shielding it from any drafts. Strike it. It splutters and catches. A small, beautiful flame. You gently nurse it to the tinder, the dried paper catching quickly. Then the kindling starts to crackle. You add small pieces of wood, gradually building the fire. The smell of burning wood slowly begins to fill the cold air, a comforting scent after the sterile chill. As the fire takes hold, casting flickering light and hesitant warmth, you think about the watchmen who relied on this very stove. These towers were manned year-round, which meant enduring brutal Russian winters. A crucial aspect of survival in such remote, cold outposts was the guaranteed provision and careful management of fuel. Ensuring a steady supply of wood was a logistics challenge for the authorities and a daily necessity for the watchmen. That's a solid mainstream historical fact. The logistical support for remote stations was complex and vital for personnel survival. Next immediate need, water. You can't just eat snow. It actually lowers your body temperature and dehydrates you in the long run. You need liquid water. The only source available is the snow piled up outside. You need a container to melt it in. You look around the stove area again. Yes, there's a dented metal pot, maybe for boiling water or cooking gruel, sitting next to the hearth. Perfect. You'll need to venture outside briefly, or maybe scoop snow that's blown in under the door or through cracks, but you have the means to melt it. You grab the pot. It's heavy, made of thick metal. You crack the door open just a sliver. The wind tries to tear it from your hand, and a blast of icy air and fine snow hits your face. Okay, maybe not outside. You look closer at the doorway. Yes, a thin drift of snow has already worked its way under the door and is piling up just inside the threshold on the ground floor. You can collect snow from there, bringing it up in the pot. A quick trip downstairs, scoop up some relatively clean snow, bring it back up, and place the pot on top of the stove to melt. Another step in the boring plan complete. Food? Well, that's a problem. There wasn't any stored food that you found. No forgotten biscuit tin, no moldy potatoes. You're relying on whatever you might have had on you. Assume it's not much, maybe just a few energy bars or nothing at all. This turns the focus even more squarely onto just enduring the immediate crisis. You're not going to starve tonight or even tomorrow, but the lack of food adds another layer of low-level stress. It underscores the temporary nature of this refuge. This isn't a place you can stay indefinitely. So the plan is maintain the fire for warmth, melt snow for water, and shelter from the storm. That's it. Boring, simple, and utterly dependent on the limited resources you've found. It's not about adventure, it's about persistence. Survival often boils down to mastering basic needs and waiting, like waiting for your internet to buffer, but with higher stakes and more frostbite. You look at the watchman's journal on the table. It remains silent, its secrets locked in its pages. You considered trying to read it earlier, but the light was poor, and deciphering old handwriting, potentially in Russian, in a freezing tower during a blizzard wasn't exactly high on the immediate survival checklist. Maybe later, if you have light and time and a desperate need for distraction. For now, it's just another artifact in this temporary home. You notice something else on the shelf next to the journal. A small, well-used deck of cards, tied with string, and next to it, a small, hand-painted wooden soldier, chipped and worn. These small, non-essential items provide a glimpse into the long hours and profound isolation these watchmen must have faced. Passing the time, perhaps playing solitaire or just whittling, was as essential for mental survival as fire was for physical warmth. This focus on combating boredom and loneliness with simple games or crafts is a quirky or fringe tidbit about life in remote historical outposts, often overlooked in favor of practical duties. As the stove begins to radiate more heat, the immediate desperate chill starts to recede. You can feel your fingers and toes protest less fiercely. The sounds of the tower settling as it warms up slightly, the subtle creaks changing pitch, are almost imperceptible under the roar of the wind, but they are there. The metal pot on the stove begins to sweat as the snow inside starts its slow transformation. You settle near the stove, feeling the warmth spread through the room. You've done what you can for now. You've found shelter, located fuel, figured out how to get water, and accepted the lack of food. You've assessed the tower's strengths and weaknesses. The plan is made. Now it's just a matter of waiting, enduring the storm. It's unclear how long this blizzard will last. Days? A week? Historians still argue whether the harshness and unpredictability of blizzards in this specific region of 19th century Russia meant watchmen were always stocked for extended isolation, or if there was a reliance on periodic supply runs that could be disastrously interrupted by severe weather. You are here in this old wooden tower, a small bubble of potential warmth and safety in a vast white chaos. The wind howls like a hungry beast outside, testing the resilience of the structure. You listen to it, feeling the deep vibrations in the floor. For now, the tower holds. Your boring survival plan is in motion. All that's left is to hunker down, conserve resources, and hope the storm eventually passes. It's not glorious, it's not exciting, but it's survival.